allora vi chiedo solo un momento per presentarvi Cinesud Photo Magazine, la piattaforma online di informazione fotografica. Perché iscriversi alla newsletter di Cinesud Photo Magazine? Perché chi frequenta la fotografia a qualsiasi titolo forse ha bisogno di sapere tutto quello che in questo magazine tutti i giorni puntualmente viene scritto. Sono circa 100 tra professionisti, amatori, aziende, testimonial che hanno aderito a Cinesud Photo Magazine. Con loro puoi conoscere il loro lato umano, il rapporto con la fotografia, puoi vedere le proprie rubriche, puoi commentarle, puoi assistere alla presentazione dei libri, puoi assistere ai workshop che settimanalmente vengono tenuti sul nostro magazine. Cinesud Photo Magazine forse è proprio quello che mancava. È forse proprio lo strumento che può esserti utile. Iscriviti subito alla newsletter.
Io non credo che ci sia bisogno di presentare Vanessa e George, tra l'altro anche l'articolo che abbiamo pubblicato, insomma, racconta un po' della loro vita e anche del loro modo di lavorare. Io passerei direttamente alle domande, perché tra l'altro Vanessa e Giorgio sono due persone che parlano molto, mi auguro che lo facciano anche stasera, quindi ci arricchiranno con tante cose da dire. So I begin with the first question. Tu Martina sei pronta, no?
Sì, sì.
Allora, leggo prima quello in italiano. Allora, okay. Vanessa, I will put some questions for Vanessa, some questions for George, but most of them are for both of you. I mean, when I ask something to Vanessa, George, you can say what you think, and on the contrary, on the other side, the same for Vanessa and George. Vanessa, che cosa ti ha spinto a lasciare il 35 mm e passare al banco ottico? Guardando le tue immagini, mi sembra che tu abbia voluto condensare in un unico linguaggio più riflessivo e lento le influenze degli autori, anche molto diversi tra di loro, che più ti hanno influenzato, mantenendo il giusto equilibrio che deriva dalla tua esperienza, dal tuo talento e dalla tua grande umanità e interesse per cosa e chi ti circonda. Sei d'accordo con questo mio punto di vista?
Okay, Vanessa, George, I'll translate that for you. Massimo is asking, Vanessa, what made you switch from 35 millimeter format to the view camera? Looking at your images, it seems to me that you wanted to condense in a meditative and slower language all of the influences of the authors, even very different from one another. Who influenced you the most, maintaining the right balance between your experience, your talent, and your great humanity, and interest in what and who surrounds you. Do you agree with that?
Do I just say yes?
So this is okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Question is why I from observational silent work to sort of direct, slower frontal work. Is that your question?
Yes, I think that Massimo was asking that exactly. Massimo è giusto, no? Che, perché ha cambiato da uno sguardo più silenzioso e meditativo anche su uno sguardo più diretto sul soggetto.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that that one of the things that I mean, I'm spent many years working in an observational way, and I'm very good at being kind of invisible, and it became problematic for me, mainly because it felt like in a certain way I felt I was not taking responsibility for my gaze, and that also means the gaze of the viewer. Mm-hmm. And so all all the time when I'm working, I'm trying to find the best way to represent what I'm experiencing. And so that became my solution to make this work that was slower and was direct, and so there was absolutely no possibility of the idea of it being somehow stolen. And so when you're literally face to face with somebody, there's a we know there's an intervention. That answers your question.
Ok, I'll translate that. Vanessa dice che la ragione principale per la quale si è decisa anche a cambiare il modo in cui fotografava era proprio il fatto che si è resa conto che il suo sguardo iniziale era uno sguardo invisibile e quindi era anche molto brava in questo, nell'osservazione silenziosa. Quello che poi è scattato è il fatto che poi si è resa conto che aveva una responsabilità nei confronti del soggetto, ma aveva anche una responsabilità nei confronti di come quel soggetto veniva visto e dello sguardo. Lei si è resa conto di dover prendere una responsabilità, cioè di doversi assumere la responsabilità sul suo sguardo e di conseguenza anche di come quel soggetto veniva visto, e questo è stato il motivo principale che l'ha indotta a cambiare modo di fotografare e quindi anche a interagire in questo senso.
Okay, Vanessa, did someone ask me if you can put a higher volume? I don't know why.
Yes.
Maybe.
Okay. How's that?
I don't know if it will make any difference. You just have to speak louder.
Oh.
Can you hear me all right? I'll just turn her up.
So the second question is, siete stati e in parte siete ancora dei nomadi, pronti a fermarvi ovunque per approfondire e conoscere. Siete riusciti a esserlo insieme e a condividere questo interesse, mantenendo comunque la vostra autonomia e la vostra indipendenza. Per condurre questo tipo di vita bisogna avere motivazioni e passioni ben consolidate. Che cosa rappresenta davvero per voi la fotografia?
I'll translate that because it's a question also for both of you. It's Massimo's asking, you have been and in part still are nomads, ready to stop anywhere to learn more. You have managed to be together and to share this interest whilst maintaining your autonomy and your independence. To lead this type of life, you need strong motivation and passion. What does photography really represent for you?
I mean, I suppose in the end, it's just defined our life. I mean, it's kind of become central to everything we've done as a couple because we met at college, photography school. And so I think it's, I don't think we can ever really separate it from who we are. Almost our kind of essence of who we are. I think maybe individually and together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I particularly want to be a nomad. Maybe I think that maybe the best way to describe it is somehow sort of profound witnessing.
Sorry, Vanessa, I cannot hear you very well.
Yes, sorry. I think if I can define what I think my belief is that I'm a witness.
Mm-hmm.
I guess fundamentally that's what it ends up being. It's carried me and also George. Difficult.
La risposta di Giorgio è stata molto diretta, ha detto è quello che è in realtà la nostra vita, quello che siamo stati fin dall'inizio perché ci siamo incontrati al college e quello che siamo sia individualmente che poi come coppia. E Vanessa ha risposto dicendo che per lei questo significa essere una testimone e continuare ad esserlo. E tendenzialmente continuare, sì, ad essere una testimone di quello che vede, anche insieme a George.
Ok. Parliamo di She Dances on Jackson. Nella proposta per la René Cartier-Bresson Award, Vanessa, tu hai scritto che in qualche modo gli Stati Uniti sono un soggetto di cui si sa o si crede di sapere tutto grazie alla letteratura, il cinema, la fotografia, ma che consapevole di ricevere sempre informazioni di seconda mano volevi verificare di persona. Perché hai deciso davvero di andare negli Stati Uniti? Solo voglia di toccare con mano? Te lo chiedo perché per anni tu e George vi siete concentrati sui Balcani, sulla Turchia, sui territori del Mar Nero, realtà completamente diverse e opposte rispetto a quella americana. Sono rimasto colpito da una prefazione di David Chandler in cui si narra di una giovane donna incinta che lavora in uno scavo archeologico, che da un lato entra in contatto manualmente con pezzi di storia, dall'altro vede crescere dentro di sé il futuro. Quella donna eri tu. Nei luoghi dove avete lavorato, in Europa in generale, la storia si respira nell'aria, a volte è una presenza cupa, una zavorra che è sempre presente nei tuoi lavori. Gli Stati Uniti sono un paese dove la storia spesso sembra d'ingombro, inutile, qualcosa da cancellare al più presto.
Massimo says, let's talk about She Dances on Jackson. In the proposal or in the preface for the Henri Cartier-Bresson Award, you wrote that in some way the United States are a country that known to everyone and everyone believes they know everything about it because it's so present in literature, cinema, photography. But you, aware of receiving, let's say, secondhand information, so information from other people, you wanted to investigate the country yourself. Why did you really decide to go to America? Was it just to, let's say, verify and explore everything with your own eyes? Massimo says, I asked this because for years, you and George have focused on the Balkans, Turkey, and the territories of the Black Sea, completely different and opposite realities compared to the American one. I was struck by a preface by David Chandler, which tells of a young pregnant woman working in an archaeological excavation, who on the one hand comes into contact with tangible pieces of history, and on the other sees the future grow within her. That woman was you. In the places where you have worked, and in Europe in general, history is in the air. And at times it is a dark presence, a heavy weight, which is always present in your works. The United States is a country where history often seems useless, something to be cancelled as soon as possible.
Don't listen.
Vanessa, we cannot hear you. I think the mic is off or something.
No.
Okay, now it's working.
Now it's working.
Okay, so I think to answer your question, both George and I had for many years wanted to make a body of work in the States, and it isn't a question of turning my back on the work that I've made in the Balkans and the Black Sea, Georgia, Turkey, but a question of I guess my investigation was about the American dream, and I actually think that the American dream is something we all carry, except that it's not called that. So perhaps I think that we all want the best for our families. We all want equality and possibility. And I think perhaps the United States, which is the sort of proponent of that idea, in a sense, to explore that felt important at that particular time in history.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think the question of history is really interesting, because what history? You know, we talk about America not having the history of Europe, but it has a lot of history. And in fact, it has very relevant history to most of us, because culturally, we've fed so much American culture and their history, in a sense. And history, it's, you know, I mean, for me, say the Second World War was a kind of, you know, we were born 15 years, 16 years after the Second World War. So I could see some of the after effects of that, because the people older than me were informed much more by it. And maybe we had quite a lot of war movies on TV that referenced the Second World War, and we had bomb damage still in London and places. But then you talk to someone who's born even just 10 years later, it becomes that much more distant. So what a lot of the history that we really attach ourselves to is kind of, it's quite present. I mean, history is now, and it's and so I think it's, in a sense, it's kind of yeah, I don't know about the relevance of it in that sense, you know, and also
Well, history that's not yet history in a strange way.
Yes.
and then if I look at photography, you know, where, you know, our field, I mean, for me, America is full of history in photography, you know, and it's
In photography, for sure.
But actually, you know, I mean, we say that, and of course we have been very influenced by American cinema and American photography. But actually, when I begin to properly think back, you know, it's not only that. My influences are very much European as well. I think that, yeah, no, I wouldn't want to say that the majority of my influences were from America. It's certainly European, but yeah, it's I guess perhaps America's the most photographed place in the world. Perhaps.
Okay, I'll translate that quickly for everyone. Allora, Vanessa ha risposto a questa domanda dicendo che la sua indagine è nata partendo dal concetto in realtà di American Dream. Non è che lei volesse diciamo mettere una pietra sopra o voltare le spalle ai lavori precedenti, ai luoghi precedenti, ma era un'esplorazione di un concetto che in realtà appartiene a tutti quanti. Non è che si chiama propriamente così, chiaramente, però tutti quanti vogliamo il meglio per noi stessi, per la nostra famiglia, per i nostri cari. E quindi diciamo che quello che lei ha voluto indagare andando negli Stati Uniti è stato proprio questo, il significato di American Dream, che cosa significava lì e che cosa significa per ognuno di noi. A livello di influenze, lei ha detto poco fa che sicuramente le sue influenze sono per la maggior parte europee. E Giorgio invece ha aggiunto a questa riflessione di Vanessa prima, ha detto che sembra che l'America non abbia la storia, è chiaro che ne ha meno rispetto ad altri paesi, però se pensiamo alla storia alla quale ci sentiamo più connessi, quella più recente, in sostanza, la cultura e quanta cultura americana assorbiamo tutti i giorni, in realtà è un paese che fa parte di ognuno di noi. Pensiamo appunto alla Seconda Guerra Mondiale o comunque a tutti gli eventi successivi, che sono gli eventi di storia recente, e soprattutto il concetto che la storia è quello che in realtà sta accadendo in questo momento e che plasma ognuno.
Ok. Alona Pardo, la curatrice della mostra di Vanessa e Dorotea Lange alla Barbican Gallery, ha dichiarato che l'attenzione di Vanessa, così come quella della Lange, è rivolta alle esclusioni sociali e geopolitiche, alle disuguaglianze culturali e all'analisi dei soggetti e dei contesti nei quali questi vivono. A mio avviso, né tu, Vanessa, né tu, George, sembrate essere interessati a raccontare qualcosa di specifico, ma solo a conoscere, in qualche modo a condividere in modo poetico questa vostra ricerca e a far riflettere e indagare metaforicamente sull'idea di periferia, di confine, di memoria, sulla transitorietà della terra e delle persone e sull'inscindibilità del legame uomo-ambiente. Vi riconoscete in questa analisi? Inoltre, tu, Vanessa, sembri essere spesso interessata a ritrarre giovani donne. Cosa ti spinge a farlo? È perché sei madre, o perché desideri vedere e finire la disparità a cui sono soggette le donne nella società, o entrambi questi aspetti, o aggiungerei anche nessuno dei due?
Massimo asks, Alona Pardo, the curator of the exhibition of Vanessa and Dorothea Lange at the Barbican Gallery, said that Vanessa's attention, as well as that of Lange, focuses on social and geopolitical exclusions, cultural inequalities, and the analysis of subjects and context in which these people live. In my opinion, neither you, Vanessa, nor you, George, seem to be interested in telling something specific, but only in knowing and in some way sharing your research in a poetic way, in making people reflect and metaphorically investigate the idea of border, memory, and on the transience of the earth and of people, and on the inseparability of the man-environment bond. Do you recognize yourself in this analysis? Furthermore, you, Vanessa, often seem to be interested in portraying young women. What drives you to them? Is it because you are a mother, or because you want to see the disparities to which women are subjected in society? Like you want to see these disparities to which women are subject in society to end? Both of these aspects, or none of these?
I think it's both, actually. Yeah, no, I really think it's both of those things. Yeah, the young women carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. Actually, so do young men, in fact. But given that I am a woman, and there is a great disparity in quality towards women, in particular, young women really carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. Yeah, so do young men, but I don't know. I still think there's an inequality that still needs to be addressed. But it impacts on everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think with both of us, I think we try and, I mean, we're, very engaged socially with what we see. And I think, I think that the way we try to work, and I think we do it in our own ways. I'm probably maybe a little bit more political than Vanessa. Well, probably a lot more political generally. But I think the language you try to find to speak about things has to be kind of nuanced, and because nothing is black and white. You learn that very quickly when you, or you should learn it very quickly when you go out there in the world and you meet so many different people, and you start to kind of confront the complexities of life and the complexities of the human condition. We're all so complicated, and there's never a straight answer, and it's not black and white. And I think the work that kind of engages longer, I think, is the work that kind of makes you sort of think a little bit more, to try to engage in something. Otherwise, if you can make work that's just appealing to the converted. And in a way, that's kind of what we see nowadays with you know, the way our feeds are working on Facebook, say, you know, they kind of just feed you information that confirms ideas that you might be forming. And it's kind of, it ends up having, you know, giving people this very narrow kind of vision of something. So the kind of, the quest to have I suppose, an open question in the work is kind of very real to both of us in the way we approach the subject.
Yeah, in a sense, it's trying not to be sort of dogmatic and for it to be open enough.
There's nothing worse than a manifesto.
Vanessa ha risposto a questa domanda di Massimo dicendo entrambe, perché nel senso le giovani donne in qualche modo portano sulle spalle il peso del mondo. Dice sicuramente anche i giovani uomini, il fatto è che lei è una donna e conosce quella realtà, ma è sicura anche del fatto che i giovani uomini portano sulle spalle il peso del mondo. Giorgia ha detto che sicuramente il suo approccio e il linguaggio è molto più politico di quello di Vanessa, ma entrambi comunque hanno un interesse per le dinamiche sociali e per ciò che concerne la società. Giorgia ha anche detto che crede che il linguaggio, man mano che le tematiche si fanno più complesse, man mano che si conoscono più persone, più realtà, debba essere un linguaggio che non è un linguaggio netto, diciamo così, in bianco e nero, ma non nella forma quanto nella lettura di queste immagini. Deve essere un linguaggio che accolga le sfumature, diciamo così, e che accolga la complessità. Ha detto anche che è facile in qualche modo fare un lavoro che accolga e che confermi delle idee già consolidate nelle persone. La cosa difficile e la cosa, diciamo così, il challenge, la sfida, sarebbe è quella di lasciare delle domande aperte nei propri lavori, ed è quello che lui e Vanessa tentano di fare, lasciare queste domande in sospeso, domande aperte nei loro lavori. E ha detto che secondo lui la cosa peggiore è fare un lavoro che sia un manifesto, quindi una cosa dogmatica, diciamo così.
Okay, Herbert still want to put a question to you, Herbert? Herbert? You there?
He says no.
It doesn't want to put any more questions. Okay, let's see in the future. Okay.
How are you?
Okay, so George, can you show or share the desktop and show some PDF of the books, because we are talking also about the books.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see before probably She Dances on Jackson or the last one by Vanessa. And the question, okay, we'll put the question in Italian. Vanessa, Michael Mack, il noto editore di libri fotografici, ha detto di te: ha dedicato la sua vita al lavoro e lo ha fatto senza preoccuparsi del guadagno o del successo sul mercato, al contrario di molti altri artisti che invece sembrano preoccuparsi solo di questo. Negli ultimi anni hai raggiunto il meritato riconoscimento internazionale, eppure mi ricordo molto bene il tuo volto quando ti ho incontrato a Parigi circa 2 anni fa. Sembravi triste e quasi a disagio quando ti parlavo del tuo successo. Di te hanno scritto: Winship non ha mai inseguito la visibilità e di conseguenza non ne ha mai raggiunta una evidente. È cambiato qualcosa nel tuo approccio rispetto alla tua passione da quando il mondo ha riconosciuto il tuo talento e il tuo impegno?
Massimo is asking, Vanessa, Michael Mack, the well-known photo book publisher, said about you, she dedicated her life to work and did it without worrying about profit or success on the market, unlike many other artists who seem to care only about this. In recent years, you have achieved well-deserved international recognition, yet I remember your face very well when I met you in Paris about 2 years ago. You seemed sad and almost uncomfortable when I told you about your success. They wrote about you. Winship has never pursued visibility and consequently has never achieved an obvious one. Has anything changed in your approach to your passion since the world recognized your talent and commitment?
Did you faint?
You hide even more.
Yeah, I don't know really. It's,
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We cannot hear you very well, though.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. It's difficult. I don't really somehow consider that it is. I don't know. It's a strange thing. I'm not sure. I'm not sure is the answer to your question. I'm always ambivalent somehow. What does it really mean? I mean, I'm grateful, but I still continue to feel to be an outsider. So.
Sorry, Vanessa, you still continue?
I still continue to feel like an outsider, but
Ok.
but I continue. So.
Vanessa dice che non sa bene come rispondere a questa domanda perché continua comunque, nonostante questo, a sentirsi come un outsider nel contesto e quindi semplicemente continua.
Okay, this is the reason why we love you. Okay, the next question is for both of you. La fotografia ha spesso a che fare con l'egocentrismo e il desiderio di stare al centro dell'attenzione. Nella vostra relazione riuscite a muovervi insieme e lavorare autonomamente o a mettervi in qualche modo a disposizione l'uno dell'altro, lasciando da parte progetti personali ed ego. George faceva da assistente a Vanessa per She Dances on Jackson, guidava ovunque Vanessa volesse, frenando di colpo, facendo manovre per metterla nella condizione di trovare la migliore angolazione per lo scatto, oppure si caricava il cavalletto in spalla e camminava al suo fianco alla ricerca di persone, animali o panorami. Per American's Parade i ruoli si sono invertiti. A parte l'amore che vi lega, cosa c'è secondo voi alla base di questo equilibrio così difficile da raggiungere?
Massimo asks, photography often has to do with ego and the desire to be at the center of attention. In your relationship, you're able to move together and work independently, or in some way make yourselves available for the other, leaving aside personal projects and ego. George was Vanessa's assistant while she was working on She Dances on Jackson. He drove wherever Vanessa wanted, pulling the brakes suddenly or finding ways to put her in a position to find the best angle for her shot. He would load the tripod on his shoulder and walk beside her in search of people, animals, or landscapes. For American's Parade, the roles are reversed. Apart from the love for one another, what do you think is the foundation of this balance that is so difficult to achieve?
It's just I think it's just an ongoing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's yeah, I don't know. So
I mean, I think that it's a difficult path for anybody,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a difficult path when both of you are essentially doing the same thing, but at the same time, it means that you're with somebody that you trust implicitly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a question of sharing, well, sharing when times are bleak and sharing when times are good.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
But it's a struggle, and we do fight. We're quite different.
So sometimes you discuss.
Sorry?
Sometimes we discuss, yeah.
That's unbelievable. Please record.
No, we fight a lot.
Yeah, but I think maybe that's why it's still alive, you know, because it's, you know, you have this constant dialogue that's going on, you know, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, but it's a kind of, I mean, you're negotiating your life and you're negotiating through life all the time. I mean, it's, you know, whether it's you against the world or whether it's you against your partner, or whether it's you together against the world, you know, it's this constant movement, and that's, I mean, that keeps you thinking, I think, and it keeps you on your toes, and that's kind of what we do, maybe, to each other.
Hanno risposto dicendo una cosa molto bella in realtà, che chiaramente il loro rapporto è nato così, nella condivisione, si è bilanciato su questa condivisione che avviene sia nei momenti bui e tristi, ma anche nei momenti chiaramente di bellezza. E poi hanno scherzato sul litigare, litigano spesso e litigano pure tanto, dicono. Però è proprio questo dialogo costante che mantiene vivo tutto quanto, perché è chiaro che è difficile quando si condivide una vita insieme, ma anche una vita in cui essenzialmente fanno anche la stessa cosa, sono due fotografi, però è proprio questa continua, come si può dire, negoziazione, questo continuo dialogo a mantenere vivo tutto quanto, perché sei sia tu, no, spesso contro il mondo, e in questo caso anche con un'altra persona, insieme al mondo o contro il mondo a volte.
Sì, tra l'altro non fanno solo lo stesso lavoro, ma si muovono anche negli stessi posti.
Cosa non da poco.
È ancora più complicata la cosa. Ok, George, this is a question for you. Come e quando ti è venuta l'idea di realizzare American's Parade? Il New York Times Magazine ti ha dato un supporto economico notevole per il progetto, se non erro simile a quello ricevuto all'incirca da Vanessa dalla Fondazione Henri Cartier-Bresson. Che tipo di ricerca hai fatto? Quanto è stato il lavoro preparatorio a quello di shooting? Perché hai scelto questo stile così seriale e apparentemente statico che in qualche modo non ti appartiene molto, almeno non hai manifestato nei precedenti lavori? Penso che tu abbia fatto anche una scelta molto coraggiosa, perché il riferimento a RFK Funeral Train di Paul Fusco è immediato e il confronto è con un lavoro davvero iconico, ormai entrato di diritto nella storia della fotografia, sia per approccio stilistico e narrativo che per i contenuti del lavoro.
George, this is a question for you. How and when did you come up with the idea of American Parade? The New York Times Magazine has given you substantial financial support for the project. If I am not mistaken, similar to what Vanessa received from the HCB Foundation. What kind of research did you do? How much preparation did you need for shooting? Why did you choose the serial and apparently static style that somehow doesn't belong to you that much? I think that you have made a very courageous choice, because the reference to Paul Fusco's RFK Funeral Train is immediate, and the comparison is with a truly iconic work, which is now by rights in the history of photography, both for the stylistic and narrative approach and for its content.
Okay, yeah, I'll show you, let me just share my screen. This is how American Parades started, which is quite removed from how it ended up. But this is me kind of, I suppose, researching while Vanessa was shooting Jackson. And so I became kind of interested in, I suppose, the politics of the road were my kind of initial motivations. And I was thinking of working this way. One of the big things that was going on when Vanessa was shooting Jackson that we followed really closely was the case of a young African-American who was shot by a vigilante
Mhm.
and who got off. And that story broke when Vanessa was working. So at this point, I was already looking at, these are Martin Luther King boulevards.
Mhm.
So I was kind of, one of the things I was thinking, oh, what's the legacy of Martin Luther King, this great man, you know? And I was, with these images, I was kind of starting to play with this idea of how we perceive
Mhm.
people and place. So I was shooting these through the window of the car, like I was a policeman in the police movies, you know, where
Okay.
you're being surveillance.
Mhm.
Because I'm constantly interested in this idea of watching and looking, and who's watching who. You know, it's a big question about photography, anyway. And I think both Last Stop and this work both kind of address this thing about watching and looking and being the spectator. So, so again, this is kind of continuation of this part. So this is the Trayvon Martin rally we went to, and this is kind of pretty much the beginning of Black Lives Matter. And this was I think it was Martin Luther King in not the day that, not the parade day. It was, I mean, I think they were, maybe it was the day he died, I think. And they were, the Trayvon Martin's family came to this parade. So it was part parade of Martin Luther King and part justice for Trayvon Martin.
Mhm.
And so the photograph on the left is Vanessa's, the one on the right was mine. So it was kind of the beginning of the thought process
Mm.
of what became American parades. And again, the second, this was a Martin Luther King parade. So Vanessa went to make portraits. This is during Jackson. This is a portrait on the left. That's one of Vanessa's, which didn't make the book, which is a shame because it's a fantastic image.
Is this Black History?
Or I think it was, no, it's Martin Luther King. And I made the photograph on the right. So interestingly, when I eventually went back to the States, I was still thinking of following this kind of very complex story about the politics of the road.
Mhm.
And I think we arrived in LA. I'll just share my screen again, sorry.
Mhm. Can I translate that for them in the meantime?
Yeah.
Giorgio ha detto che ci ha fatto vedere le prime immagini che sono praticamente come American's Parade è cominciato, quindi avevano praticamente immagini totalmente diverse da quelle che poi è diventato il libro, totalmente in qualche modo, più che altro erano i suoi abbozzi iniziali perché erano fotografie che scattava mentre Vanessa stava lavorando e facendo ricerca con She Dances on Jackson e stava insomma ritraendo questo ragazzo che era stato sparato da un vigilante e nel frattempo George osservava e ricercava e appunto questa idea di politica della strada, gli interessava di come lo sguardo di chi è guardato e di chi guarda. Infatti le fotografie le scattava dalla macchina come se fosse lui stesso, no? un vigilante. Era intrigato da tutte queste boulevard americane che spesso avevano nomi come Martin Luther King Boulevard e quindi era interessato all'eredità di quella figura lungo quella strada. Poi ha fatto vedere delle fotografie successive di queste parate che in parte, in quelle in particolare che abbiamo visto, erano in parte una commemorazione a Martin Luther King e in parte a un ragazzo ucciso, Trayvon Martin, e era interessante vedere come erano accostate le fotografie, perché quella a sinistra era una fotografia di Vanessa e quella a destra era una fotografia di George, quindi era un periodo in cui appunto Vanessa lavorava al suo progetto e George stava investigando e osservando e mettendo insieme le sue idee.
So this was, I think it was about 5 years after Vanessa finished Jackson that I thought, I've got to go and attempt my American story. So I was still thinking about this notion of the road and how it kind of divides and separates people, as opposed to the kind of romantic road that we kind of think about. And so, because America, you really do have this nation where, in towns where, you can talk about the other side of the track. Classic Romeo Juliet kind of West Side Story is how they've kind of done it. But it's and how it's very much separated by ethnicity. America, it's very segregated in that way. So there was a lot of things I wanted to talk about, and so I went with this idea of trying to look at this very complex story, not really knowing how I was going to do it. I was looking at a lot of different strands that I was thinking about photographing, and I gave myself 6 weeks to go and see if I can start something where I was thinking, yeah, this is worth pursuing. And it was going to, it would be a very long project. And I think we arrived in LA, and I think within 3 days, roughly, I saw that there was a Martin Luther King parade on the Friday in Long Beach, and then on a Saturday in LA. And we drove to the Long Beach, and this is in Long Beach, and I'd been on this road because it was one of the Martin Luther King boulevards that I'd walked down before. And as soon as we stopped the car, it already just started, and as soon as I got to the parade, I just started photographing like this instantly.
You have done some work in California with people crossing roads.
No, I was going to show that's
okay.
after.
Sorry, I'm butting in.
Vanessa has forgotten my order of how the work.
Sorry.
So it was kind of interesting because I was thinking, I mean, now I've shown you the other pictures from when Vanessa was shooting. I know where my references were, but when I got there and started to make this picture, these pictures, this is from the first day, this is from the LA one. They were kind of instant, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I had this other story in my head, or another approach, but I kind of felt that I could say everything I wanted to say within these kind of tableau portraits. And at this stage, do you want to translate? Was that?
Yes, thanks, George. Praticamente quello che George incuriosiva e che aveva desiderio di investigare era proprio questa idea di strada, di come in realtà molto lontano dall'idea romantica di strada che abbiamo, negli Stati Uniti la strada significa in qualche modo divisione proprio politica e sociale, anche soprattutto data dall'etnia, diciamo così. Quello che poi lui voleva dire, doveva trovare un modo di dire tutte queste cose delle quali voleva parlare, che erano veramente tante e difficili da condensare, doveva insomma trovare un modo per raccontarle. Abbiamo visto, diciamo, i piccoli appunti fotografici dai quali era partito, e lui in qualche modo aveva in mente questo, ma poi arrivato a Los Angeles si è detto: io adesso mi do 6 settimane per capire come raccontare, e sono arrivati a una parata di Martin Luther King e istantaneamente lì è andato a scattare, e queste sono le fotografie. Ha capito che questi tableau, queste parate, queste diciamo foto di gruppo che poi aveva trovato in maniera molto istintiva e spontanea riassumevano alla fine tutto quello che lui voleva dire. e appunto era un'idea in qualche modo molto diversa dalla quale era partito, o comunque si era già sviluppata in quello che aveva trovato arrivando sul posto.
And then I suppose I'd also in between Jackson and starting this, I'd published Last Stop, which was also influences this work, because I was very much interested in the notion of community, individual, and how those three interact with each other, and what it is to be a community now, what the individual is within that, and as a kind of commentary of how we are today, you know, with our kind of, I suppose we're becoming more and more individualistic. And so it kind of started to address other questions that I was also interested in. So I kind of instantly started to do this. And at this point, I was thinking, I'm there for 6 weeks. It's not like you can't find parades all the time. And so I'd gone up to San Francisco, and at this point, I still wasn't thinking about just parades, but thinking about these communities. Where is it that you see this visibility of communities? So then I was in Berkeley. So these are students at Berkeley University. And so I kind of found this junction, and I went there maybe 2-3 times for I never go for very long. But to me, the demographic of Berkeley is really clearly illustrated in the photographs, which was, so you're in California, it's very Asian or white, and very interestingly, not so many Hispanic and African Americans. Then I went to Chinatown. And this is in January, I think. So not very many tourists. It's mostly American Chinese coming to shop and so on. And so I kind of took these. So I kind of had worked out my frame. And the other thing I'm fascinated with is the urban landscape. So this kind of also gave me this opportunity to reference the American urban landscape, and you know, so and that references a lot of photographers in you know, American photography. But I do, you know, one of the challenges in the US is that you often see images that you know, and you could almost, you know, you can look at an image and say, oh, this photographer or that photographer. And so it's kind of how do you photograph that landscape that is so urban landscape that's so seductive, and do something different with it, to give it another layer. And in this way, it's kind of that interaction, I think, between the people and that landscape is kind of how I managed to kind of work it.
George dice che in queste 6 settimane in cui insomma doveva in qualche modo sviluppare il suo progetto, o comunque dargli una base molto importante, l'altra tematica che lo incuriosiva, aveva a cuore di raccontare, era l'idea di comunità, connessa all'idea di individuo e come l'individuo si relaziona all'interno della comunità. Quindi quelle parate non era appunto solo l'idea della parata, ma era anche questa tematica che si andava a convogliare lì dentro. Infatti le altre foto che poi ci ha mostrato, che poi lui ha scattato, non sono in qualche modo foto di parate, ma sono foto di piccole comunità, come in una fotografia di Berkeley, dove già dalla fotografia era molto chiara la demografia della comunità di quell'università in particolare, molti bianchi, molti asiatici, e nella foto successiva ecco, scusate, molti bianchi, molti asiatici, ma non c'erano ispanici, non c'erano afroamericani, e quindi ecco, la sua indagine si è andata molto a concentrare su questa idea di comunità in seguito.
And it was only, I mean, I was fortunate enough that I'd done some work with the New York Times magazine before, and they were curious to see what I was doing in the US. They knew that I was there, and I showed them those early photographs, obviously more from each one, and they basically became interested. It was only when I went on to New Orleans to do the Mardi Gras that they could, and it was more parades, that they kind of could see the bigger picture. And from that point, they were very generous. They kind of paid for what I'd done and then started to fund me going forward.
Mhm.
So, I mean, without their help, I don't know if I would have been able, it would have taken me, you know, I did this over a year, it would have taken me a lot longer because I wouldn't have been able to go backwards and forwards
Yes.
from the UK to the to America, you know, sometimes for, you know, 1 week.
Mhm.
I think that I booked my 6 weeks, so I flew back to England, and then a week later I flew back to the States because it was St. Patrick's Day. You know, there's no way I would have been able to do that on my own. And then you have pictures. I have in the book. I have these landscapes, which kind of peopleless landscapes, which for me kind of reference that in every photograph, you know, you're also looking at a landscape.
Mi sono dimenticata di dirvi una cosa prima che aveva detto molto interessante dell'idea del paesaggio urbano negli Stati Uniti, ed è anche una grande sfida quella di fotografare negli Stati Uniti, perché ci sono dei paesaggi che sono strafotografati e stravisti e sotto gli occhi di tutti quanti, e quindi è interessante andare a fotografare qualcosa e dargli una lettura ulteriore. E lui è stato molto fortunato comunque che il New York Times gli ha dato i fondi per continuare questo progetto, perché se l'avesse dovuto fare tutto quanto da solo sicuramente non l'avrebbe concluso in così poco tempo, ci avrebbe messo molto, molto di più. Per fare un esempio, lui aveva prenotato da sé le prime 6 settimane, e poi è tornato una settimana negli Stati Uniti e poi è ritornato per per la festa di San Patrizio, ed è poi ritornato negli Stati Uniti, e non ci sarebbe stato modo di farlo da solo questo. E infatti il New York Times era interessato per fortuna al suo lavoro, visto che George aveva già lavorato con loro, ma è stato solamente quando hanno cominciato a vedere le foto delle parate del martedì grasso che hanno capito l'entità del lavoro, hanno capito quanti argomenti c'erano e quante letture c'erano in queste fotografie, e quindi hanno dato un finanziamento molto consistente per permettergli di andare avanti.
Okay. Did you finish, George, or do you have something more to say about this question? Because I have another question for you.
Yeah, no, you can have another question.
Ok. Pubblicare con un grande editore da un lato dà visibilità e larga distribuzione, dall'altro a volte manca un po' di libertà nel graphic design. Tu, George, ti autoproduci spesso i libri e riesci a farlo bene anche con un profitto che a volte è inimmaginabile con un grande editore. Vorrei che tu mostrassi a American Parade, già lo sta facendo, e che raccontassi un po' tutte le scelte che sono state fatte dal punto di vista del design e della realizzazione. Mi ricordo che lo hai stampato in Turchia e che mi dicesti che non avevi mai raggiunto una tale qualità di stampa.
George, publishing with a large publisher on the one hand gives you visibility and wide distribution. On the other, sometimes it gives you little freedom, for example, in graphic design choices. You often self-produce books and manage to do it very well, even with a profit, which is sometimes unimaginable with a large publisher. I would like, well, okay, you were showing American Parade, and would like to know the choices that have been made from a design point of view. Massimo says, I remember that you printed it in Turkey and you told me that you had never achieved such an amazing print quality.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's two things. I mean, Vanessa has worked with mostly with publishers. I mean, I did the Turkey this Turkey book with completely opposite of the spectrum to the last two books, which is with 4 publishers. And so, and I've, you know, and a wonderful Claudio from Postcard was, he, you know, when he came to me, there was another lead publisher, and in the end, I gave it to him because of his wonderful openness and honesty. And he allowed, especially with the print quality, he kind of let me push certain, you know, well, we spent a lot of money on paper, I think, with me trying to perfect it. But the difference between doing your own book is that for me, the book itself becomes, and it's not, I mean, like Jackson's a beautiful book that Vanessa made with Mac, and so is actually Sweet Nothings is also a beautiful small book. But I think with me, the book becomes part of the work. And so when I made like with Last Stop, which is a concertina, you know, for me the work, the finished artwork is not the exhibition with this particular work. It's this book, because
this becomes the exhibition.
Because I can pin this up on a wall, and it was kind of critical to the concept of the book, because you can change the sequencing, because in a sense it's, I mean, it's a shot across London through London's buses. Again, it's about community and place, and it's about how we perceive on the street, you know. A lot of it's kind of about this notion of we make our own, we see little mini soap operas in the streets all the time, little things acting out, and we don't know what's actually going on. We kind of make our own stories and move on. And so it's that element of, when you're in a city, it's no one knows your business really, where, you know, which is why some people love cities, whereas if you're in a small place, everyone knows your business. And so the book is kind of works around that. But the reason I kind of wanted to have it as a concertina is that you can change the edit, the sequence. You know, I can have it like this, and it's hard to show, but you know, I can suddenly take the picture out. I can take one picture out and resequence it. So I can't really show you like this. And to make a book, I mean, I had a publisher, Thames and Hudson, who were interested in making this book, but it was going to look, you know, they couldn't really do what I wanted them to do, to the, I suppose, to the quality that I wanted to do it, for it to be economically, to make sense for them, because they, I suppose you pay for distribution, there's a lot of cost that the publisher doesn't, you know, has to pay out. So publishers don't actually make a lot of money from their books, and photographers make almost zero from their books. If you make the book yourself, you're kind of controlling the whole element of it. So you cut out a lot of middle people. And so, you know, I mean, I was lucky that I found a great printing house in Istanbul, and because I didn't work, I mean, with this book I didn't work with a designer, and because I sequence all my work, generally, I mean, there's things that I don't know about the print house. If you've got the print house owner telling you what's possible and what's not possible, and you can challenge them to kind of do things, it's like it's a wonderful kind of relationship to be able to have. And it was the same with, I mean, with American Parades, because this is, you know, at first I think Ufuk, who's the owner of Mass Printing House, Offset in Istanbul.
But he also printed.
Which he printed this one as well. But he, you know, when I told him I wanted to do this completely lay flat book, with no stitching, it's all, every page is glued together, back to back. I think he tried to put me off at first until he kind of realized that it was going to really present the work to its best. You know, I mean, I tried with stitching it. What, you know, the faces get cut up in the middle, you know, and so, you know, there's no way any publisher would do this book. It's too expensive to do for a publishing house, unless it's funded. Right. And the two books that I saw before that were like this were funded by, one was for Ferrari, you know, and one was for a hotel. So they had the money, you know, they were funding it. It's more for their own publicity. And so for me, it's kind of how the work gets, you know, how do I present this work in a book? It has to be a certain size because you need to see the details. So it has to open out, or you make a book this size that opens like that, which is too big. I didn't want to make a huge, well, it's a big book as it is, but it's not that different in terms of height and width to a lot of other books. You know, and then when you're independent, you have these chance meetings. You know, I was at the print house designing, you know, going to thinking about working on the cover. I had this idea of this text being big, but I had completely the wrong font because I don't understand type and fonts. And then there was a designer there working for Void, who's part of Void, João Linul, who was printing 3 books, and we started talking, and he goes, George, I've got a great font for you, you know, a great typeface.
But he had come to the printing house because of Last Stop in the first place. Yeah, because
he wanted to make a concertina, and someone told him about this book, and he ended up at the printing house in the first place, maybe a year before or something, or because of this book. And then it's, you know, and that's kind of the beauty of independence sometimes, and forming relationships. And he, you know, he came up with the front really amazingly quickly. And I was playing around with this idea of this outline, and he suggested, because I was struggling with the index, and he suggested that we do this, you know, we do it for the index, which I absolutely love, but which took me and Vanessa a long time on the computer going around the images. But I think it's, yeah, they're all kind of elements that I have control over. You know, it's and if I'm going to put a book out, I want to be happy with it in 20 years' time. I want not just the book, but the work as well. You know, I mean, first and foremost, I won't put a book out until I'm happy with the work. I think Vanessa's the same. You know, we're not rushing to put books out.
Ok, I'll translate that. Oh, sorry, Vanessa. Ok. George praticamente dice che dipende fondamentalmente dal risultato che ha bisogno di ottenere, se rivolgersi a una casa editrice o andare di self-publish. Questo perché è chiaro che una casa editrice tendenzialmente deve investire in qualcosa, ma anche, diciamo, fare in modo che ne valga la pena. E per quanto riguarda in particolare American's Parade, diciamo che questa cosa era improbabile che avvenisse, dato che lui non voleva per esempio far rilegare il libro, perché si sarebbe perso qualcosa del lavoro, perché la rilegatura sarebbe andata a finire sui visi delle persone a metà pagina. Voleva incollare, voleva un risultato in cui la foto era piatta e incollata e che si vedesse tutto e che la qualità fosse alta. E quindi diciamo dipende tanto anche dalle scelte che qualcuno decide di fare per te, e invece nel self-publish hai la possibilità di avere il controllo su tutte queste fasi e di decidere che cosa è meglio per te, per il tuo lavoro. E anche l'altro grande vantaggio del self-publish è il fatto che ci sono questi incontri casuali, come è avvenuto nel caso di American's Parade. Lui era andato in stamperia e aveva fatto questa scritta, questa copertina, ma il font era completamente sbagliato. E lì ha incontrato il designer di Void che stava stampando dei libri e gli ha suggerito.
Void è una casa editrice greca molto di alta qualità, insomma, che fa dei libri molto, molto belli, no? Perché magari non tutti sanno cos'è Void. Scusami.
Sì, insomma, ha incontrato questo designer che gli ha suggerito, insomma, si sono messi a parlare, chiacchierare, e gli ha suggerito il font che adesso ora è la copertina. E lo stesso vale per l'indice. Non aveva assolutamente idea di come fare per l'indice per descrivere le fotografie che erano presenti nel libro. Alla fine il designer gli ha suggerito di fare in quel modo, di fare l'indice delle fotografie come, diciamo, i contorni delle foto. E lui e Vanessa si sono messi lì di santa pazienza a fare tutte queste linee intorno alle sue foto, e quindi alla fine dipende, dice, molto dal risultato che si vuole ottenere. Per lui è molto importante che un libro che fa sia di qualità per lui e che lo sia anche tra 20 anni. Non c'è tutta questa fretta nel dover per forza uscire con un fotolibro.
Ok, ovviamente parlava anche del lavoro che doveva soddisfarlo anche tra 20 anni nel suo libro.
Sì.
Okay. For both of you, it's the last question, so you can go. Siete grandi compratori di libri fotografici, la vostra libreria fa davvero invidia. Tra l'altro c'è un video, loro hanno, diciamo, un video che trovate facilmente su internet in cui loro mostrano i loro libri per Mac. E, noi fotografi siamo spesso un po' libro dipendenti, il mercato è piccolo e gli addetti e i compratori sono sempre gli stessi. Cosa rappresenta per voi realmente il libro fotografico? Cosa vi attrae in genere? Il contenuto, il design, entrambi? Qual è secondo voi un buon libro?
This is a question for both Vanessa and George. You are big buyers of photo books. Your library can make anyone jealous. Photographers are often a bit book addicted. The market is small and employees and buyers are always the same. What does the photo book really represent for you? What generally attracts you to one, the content, the design, both of these aspects? What do you think is a good book?
Content, number one, I think. Yeah, no, I see some great designs, but very bad content. So, you know, it just doesn't interest me. There's occasionally I will buy a book that has a great idea, but it's kind of and well executed, but it's a one-off in that I look at it, I think, oh, that's a great idea, I get it, but the photographs don't necessarily make me want to go back and look at them. So I think the content, the strength of the photography, and wanting to go back for me is the strongest thing. And then, but you know, I've seen good photography ruined in bad printing as well, bad production, and that makes you not want to have a book. But I think I mean, in the end, I mean, I think that's why I self-publish now, is that I want to control all aspects. You know, I want to have great production, great photography, everything. But yeah, I think first and foremost, it's the content. I mean, Mac is a very interesting publisher because Mac's books are very simple. You know, design is really simple, very good sequencing, but great photography generally. And so, you know, the strength of his books, as he keeps it, you know, there's no over design in his books. So I wouldn't say there's one particular thing, you know, I mean, first and foremost, it's content.
I think also it's, for me, it's what books represent. I mean, I have a kind of, or rather we have a long relationship with books. I mean, I struggle to read. But also we had a bookstall, a secondhand bookstall, not photography books, I should say. And so we have this very long standing relationship with books and photography, and latterly photography books. Yeah, it's for me it's what they represent. They're they take us on extraordinary journeys. They're transformative.
Yeah, and we were brought up. I mean, we studied photography before the internet. It's so the only place you could really look at photo books were in the college libraries, and that's kind of where we used to. I mean, I certainly spent hours poring over the same few photography books, and I suppose that hasn't kind of really changed, and you can take them with you. It's so different to looking on a screen, looking at an image on the screen. It doesn't add up. I mean, and it's quite interesting because today when we went to see this puppet of Alma, the Syrian refugee that's been carried across Europe, we took our granddaughter with us, and she took over my phone because she wanted to make photographs. But when we got back here afterwards, she wanted it printed.
But
and I loved the fact that she wanted a physical print, something on paper.
She also took pen and crayons and paper, and she also drew as well. So that still holds, I think. Having the materiality of it still remains important. And just to say that we have a lot of photography books, but I don't wish for it to be a collection. Our long-term I guess plan, or our long-term wish, is that we, and particularly George, we set up this place in Bulgaria where we'll eventually take these books and be able to share them with people.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't have a desire to have a collection of books that sits and only we can.
But I mean, the beauty of paper, I mean, because there was a crowd to greet this Alma, so Bella made her own American Parades picture. But to have this on paper is priceless. It's in her little book, Istanbul.
Also, I think you're supporting your community, and
Vanessa e Giorgio stavano facendo vedere, appunto, per rimarcare quanto in qualche modo resta importante la matericità della carta, del libro, un disegno della loro nipotina, del fatto che insomma hanno raccontato questo aneddoto. Lei voleva, in una fiera, ha chiesto a George il telefono e voleva fare delle fotografie, ma poi una volta tornati voleva stamparle, voleva averle con sé, si era portata i pastelli, le matite colorate e tutto quanto. E per rispondere alla domanda di Massimo, George aveva cominciato dicendo che la prima cosa in assoluto alla quale lui insomma fa caso in un buon fotolibro è il contenuto, perché ci può essere del design estremamente interessante e pazzesco, però poi tanti ne ha visti così che poi a livello di contenuto non sono molto interessanti, ma allo stesso è pur vero che ci sono che tanta bella fotografia, tanto contenuto molto interessante è rovinato da una produzione scadente. Quindi quello è anche la cosa buona di autoprodursi i fotolibri, il fatto che hai controllo su tutti questi processi. Diceva di Mac che Mac è un editore molto interessante ormai perché il suo design è molto semplice, ha un editing chiaramente molto buono delle foto e i libri che produce però hanno comunque un design, sono molto semplici nel design e punta sulla qualità delle fotografie e del contenuto. Dicevano dei libri, insomma, rimarcavano il fatto che chiaramente loro sono cresciuti con il libro fotografico, hanno fatto la scuola di fotografia quando ancora non c'era internet e quindi l'unico modo di vedere fotografia era di andare a sfogliare fotolibri, quindi è un qualcosa che fa parte chiaramente di loro e del loro percorso e hanno questa grande collezione, però Vanessa e George non vogliono che rimanga una collezione così stantia e, insomma che va a invecchiare nel tempo, vogliono portarla piano piano in Bulgaria e renderla accessibile a tutti quanti e hanno questo progetto
In Bulgaria hanno una piccola casa, hanno comprato una piccola casa. So I will move to Bulgaria also with you to share the books, you know. Okay.
I think
Okay, this was the last question, and I think, I mean, we have been talking for a lot, but Herbert Steele, who is Italian, I think, because he answered in Italian, is he online? He want, Herbert Steele, vuoi fare una domanda? Is a ghost.
Yeah, he's Italian because he came to a workshop in New York with us.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, but I think it's not on the line. He probably has problem because
ha detto che no.
No, grazie, no.
I mean, he lives in Oman, I think, but okay. C'è qualche domanda tra i presenti? No? Ok.
Sì.
There's one here, Ventu.
Sì, buonasera.
Ciao.
Buonasera. Sì, vorrei fare questa domanda. Tanto complimenti per la bellissima atmosfera che abbiamo visto in quei libri. Però la mia domanda è questa. Aprendo American Parade, credo che dalla prima fotografia si capisca che siamo negli Stati Uniti. Mi chiedo io, loro potrebbero fare questo lavoro da qualche altra parte nel mondo?
He's got an interesting question for you. He says, he began saying thank you and thank you for this beautiful talk and chat that you had with us, and thank you for the beautiful atmospheres in your books. He was curious about American's Parade, and he said that as soon as you open the book, you realize you are in the United States. Do you think that it would be possible to make a similar work in another place, elsewhere?
Yes, yeah, without a doubt. Yeah,
Oh.
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, it would be. I mean, you'll have different cultural elements within it, but I kind of think I mean, one of my concerns in American parades was what community looks like as a group. I think it would look different in different places. You know, if I think of when I was living in Turkey, in Istanbul, I remember whenever I used to come back to Istanbul from being in England, I used to go, this is maybe 15 years ago now, or longer, I would go and to a stall that was selling videos. And I kind of remember that there'd be this long stall and it would be me and one other person, and he'd be right up next to me. And I'm kind of thinking, what's he trying to do? You know, is he trying to pick my pocket? But Turkish, they're very comfortable being close to each other. Mm-hmm. You know, and I kind of noticed that. I mean, when I started to get really interested in this kind of how people are on the street together, I first was shooting in Ukraine from a bus. And I was curious about, in Ukraine, it had a certain feel to it. People were lost in their own space. And I thought, oh, what would it look like in other countries? And because I was living in Istanbul, I did a photographed in Istanbul from the bus. It was so different because Turkish people, one, I don't know if it's they don't want to be alone, they don't like to be alone, but they're constantly very close and they're constantly looking around. You know? And I think so.
So your answer is no, then.
So no, you get a different look. It will represent different things. If I was to do it in India, there'll be a very different feel to, say, Italy or England, but it will still produce some commentary about that place. And I do think in Europe we'll be much closer to America than India would be. You know, I think the way our societies are getting structured are becoming quite similar. I think often you see things happen in the States and you kind of think, oh no, we're in line for that. It's coming our way soon. And so I think, you know, we'll become more isolated in our own spaces in the same way eventually.
Giorgia ha risposto alla domanda dicendo sì, senza dubbio, sicuramente ci sarebbero tanti altri aspetti culturali e della società che emergerebbero. Fondamentalmente in American's Parade lui era interessato all'idea di comunità e quindi come questa comunità si declinava nei suoi differenti aspetti, e quindi questo è un qualcosa che si può indagare anche altrove. Faceva l'esempio della Turchia e diceva di come ad esempio in Turchia lui ha notato andandoci che le persone è come se non riescono a stare da sole, hanno sempre bisogno del contatto fisico e della vicinanza, o comunque se stanno ferme e stanno da sole stanno sempre guardando e cercando qualcosa, e lui fotografava dalla macchina e notava questo. E quindi sì, in qualche modo sarebbe possibile fare lo stesso altrove e ne emergerebbero semplicemente altri commentari, altre discussioni su quel tipo di società. In qualche modo la società europea è molto più simile a quella americana, se vogliamo, rispetto a quella indiana. Quindi sì, sicuramente emergerebbero aspetti differenti, però è un qualcosa che lui ritiene possibile.
Ok, ci sono altre domande? No, ok.
No. E volevo dire io due cose, se possibile, a Vanessa e a George. Allora, intanto ringraziarli per questa serata che è stata senz'altro una delle cose più belle che abbiamo mai fatto. E stasera devo ringraziare anche Martina perché è stata straordinaria nel suo tradurci e darci la bellezza che loro esprimono soltanto a vederli così in faccia, e poi continuare a litigare, perché litigando e ottenere quello che hanno ottenuto credo che sia un buon sistema. Quindi non smettete mai di litigare, perché la bellezza che traspare dai vostri lavori, dal vostro vivere insieme, ci ha riempito la serata. Io sono veramente felice, orgoglioso di avervi ospitato. Ci sono altre persone che avrebbero voluto intervenire, ma non intervengono per timidezza, per stanchezza, che hanno i tuoi libri, Vanessa, in particolare parla di te, uno di questi amici che sta nella talk con noi e che apprezza moltissimo i tuoi lavori. Io devo dirti la verità, mi sono preoccupato di averne uno per ora di libri tuoi, ma farò di tutto per avere tutti gli altri. Perché? Perché c'è troppa bellezza in quello che fai, e averti conosciuto di persona credo che abbia avvalorato ancora di più questa mia idea che mi ero fatto. Grazie di cuore per esserci stati, grazie Massimo a te per essere riuscito a coinvolgere due personaggi di questa statura, e continuiamo, speriamo così. Mi farebbe piacere sentire la loro voce a risposta di questa mia domanda, questa mia osservazione.
Francesco is saying to both of you that he's absolutely honored to have you here this evening, and he thanks you on behalf of everyone because you filled this evening for us with what you say and what you do. And he's also speaking on behalf of the people who maybe feel because of being a little bit tired or because they were a bit shy, they didn't intervene, but he knows because they wrote to him that they've bought your books and they have discovered something that has changed them and transformed them. And also oh gosh, I just forgot what I was about to say.
No, continuare a litigare.
Sì.
Yes, you definitely, it says definitely have to continue to have your little arguments, because it keeps us going, because if this is what makes you produce what you produce, it's incredible for us.
Quite big arguments.
It's easy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Grazie a tutti.
So,